Mike, could and should the Chancellor have done more to protect households?
Sorry,
could and should the Chancellor have done more to protect households?
Well, I think we've been acknowledging this afternoon the Chancellor faced a very difficult set of circumstances leading up to this autumn statement, with a desperate need to restore the public finances, but in the face of an imminent recession, plus the structural adjustment that's making us all poorer. We were very pleased to see that the Chancellor did indeed commit to uprating benefits in line with inflation in April. That was a significant step, as well as increasing the benefit cap. In replacing the energy price guarantee, he is being less generous than Liz Truss wanted to be when she was Prime Minister, but he's done so in a targeted way, so taking sort of the targeted aspect of the previous year's approach. So I think that I think overall there is a lot to be welcomed in the autumn statement for low-income households. The fact that RDHI is falling by that amount basically reflects, as Carl has said, we're all acknowledging that energy prices are making the country poorer, and there is no getting around that.
Okay, so you don't think the Chancellor could have done anything else, in your opinion, to support households from the cost of living crisis? I was surprised by some of pleasantly surprised by some of what the Chancellor said, which is, I guess, is a way of saying that I feared it could have been worse. I think it was very good of him to commit to the measures that he did commit to. Of course, next year will not be easy for low-income households, particularly I'm worried about next winter, because energy prices will be significantly higher next winter than they are this winter. So I am worried about that, particularly for prepayment meter households, which would bear the entire burden next year. But next year is, of course, a long way off, and we do need to see what's going to happen to global energy prices between now and then. Carl, could and should the Chancellor have done more?
Well, I think fundamentally, as Mike says, it's difficult in a world where a key good that we import is becoming much, much more expensive. That makes us poorer. The government can't make all of that pain go away for everybody. That's just not possible. It does have choices about how that pain is allocated. It can change the timing over time by borrowing more money, pushing it into the future. We're doing a lot of that this winter with the energy price guarantee that's in place, which I think is arguably, if we had time to design something, I think we probably wouldn't give as much money to better off households to help them with their energy bills this winter. I understand it was had to be set in place very quickly, though, so I'm sympathetic to why we have that in place. I think for next year, the more targeted approach of saying, well, actually, there's key groups we want to protect: pensioners, people on disability benefits, low-income families with children. I think that's a sensible approach to be taking. I think the challenge now is to make sure that as much as possible people aren't falling through the cracks of that targeting. I'd probably now be worried about what about those people who are eligible for universal credit but not taking it up? How do we get the design right in terms of the payments we're making each month? What about people who are flowing on and off universal credit each month? I think those kind of things need to be got right. I think borrowing more money is obviously always an option, but you have to be very careful when markets were clearly very concerned about what had happened just a few weeks earlier. So I'm sort of sympathetic that the Chancellor has done quite a lot, and doing more may have been possible, but I think others can judge whether he should have done more.
You mentioned earlier about reforming taxes and making that a fairer system. Is that something you think the Chancellor could have done and should have done?
Well, I think virtually all of the UK's taxes could be made to work better. Successive governments have failed to implement reforms which would make them work better, and I guess, I have to be a bit sympathetic because he's not been Chancellor for very long, but if we have a crisis and we need to shove up taxes, I'd rather we took the opportunity, if we're going to make unpleasant decisions on the tax side, to reform the taxes and then put them up. And you can do it in a way which causes fewer distortions. That's not to say that tax rises are ever going to be easy to do or not have any unwanted consequences, but they would be fewer if we designed those taxes well than if we just push up unreformed taxes.
Just further to the point made by the Chair in the opening questions, so a fairer way of doing it would have been to, I think you talked about raising the threshold or dropping the threshold to make it fairer. Do you want to just elaborate on that point a little bit?
Well, I think I can't tell you that putting up the freezing the threshold is less fair than, for example, just putting up the rate. There's a distributional consequence. Different households will be winning and losing. Others can judge which is a fairer outcome. It's more the point that our taxes are a long way from perfect, and if we're just pushing up our taxes, why don't we take the opportunity to reform them? And so I gave the example of capital gains tax, where we've pushed up capital gains tax by cutting the allowance. Capital gains tax is badly designed. It taxes gains which could just be because of inflation. It encourages people to hold on to their assets right through to death rather than realising gains earlier. I would much rather I'd much rather have a system which allowed some indexation, which got rid of that tax-free death element, and then also increase the rate or cut the threshold then, having reformed it so it's a better tax. And you can do that to lots of other taxes too.
Okay, thank you. Just slightly different question for you, Dr. Linda. But you're welcome to comment on could and should the Chancellor have done more. But is there a danger that consumer confidence is going to drop off rapidly in the face of such a drop in living standards and weaken consumption more than expected?
Yes, I think that's a significant risk. Consumer confidence has already dropped quite a lot. This is the closest analogy to this recession is from the 1970s. And when it's a supply-side shock like this, people do become extremely worried, especially when they hear that 80% or so of the inflation is global factors. So it's out of the control of government. And so I think the stresses that have made around growth is indeed to try and show that the spending today is targeted to helping those who need it the most, and also to generating growth, because that helps, I think, look forward, because economies always have ups and downs. The question is fiscal policy cushioning the recession and then spending strategically so we come out of it in a position where people can feel a bit more confident. Another example I'll give is during the pandemic lockdowns. If you looked at Germany and France, their fiscal stimulus, a good portion of the investment was targeted towards green energy. So Germany wanted every petrol station to have an electric charging point. All of that is to give consumers a look ahead to this. These are tough times, but we're spending the money so you get better quality of growth in the future, and that we can see a longer-term horizon, which is why I actually think in this very, thankfully, unusual type of recession, it's even more important to show how strategically, the spending, the support is going to invest, for when the recession will end.
So the point about the Chancellor, do you think in that particular area then, into looking forward and giving people that confidence?
I was just reflecting on the short period he's had to do this. Yes, ideally, yes. I think this was a autumn statement. It does have investment measures around growth, but I think, as we have all said, we think he's had a very short period of time to put it together, and a lot of it was around stability. But in the next go at this, I think it would be very helpful to have a focus on how to invest to grow, what kind of growth are we looking at, and the way in which taxes, and in particular, are geared at supporting that. And not everything is going to work towards pro-growth, as I said. Some fiscal policy is geared at redistribution, things which are absolutely needed. But I think having a clear vision about how we will look in 3 to 5 years' time will help boost confidence of consumers, and I think would be very helpful.
Thank you. Samuel, so thinking about wealthier households, or those that have managed to accumulate savings, and we know there's quite a few people have, how willing do you think they'll be to support consumption in the country by using those savings that they've already accumulated?
So the sort of excess savings held by households are colossal. If you look at them on paper, equal to about 14% of their annual disposable incomes for all households, about £180 billion. I mean, if they were to tap that, then that would provide tremendous support to the economy over the next couple of years. Trouble is, many economists have had this theory now for the last 18 months that as soon as we got out of lockdown, we would start to spend down those savings we accumulated in aggregate, and that just simply hasn't happened. Most forecasters, the OBR, most have been surprised by how slow the saving rate has been to fall. Most households have remained very cautious for the last year or so. There's also data to suggest that the distribution of those savings is not very even, not in a sort of demand-enhancing way, that the vast bulk must be held by high-income households, because we can see in ONS survey data over the course of this year there's been a rising proportion of households that say that they cannot afford an unexpected expense of £850. It's risen to about 36% from 28% at the end of last year. So suggesting that this total stock, which households haven't drawn down, has become even more unequally distributed over the last year, and many more households are living hand to mouth. And so, yes, we're also starting to see in the data signs that households are picking up their repayments of mortgages, ad hoc repayments. So most households are locked into fixed-rate mortgages where they committed to monthly payments for 2 or 5 years. But most of those mortgages do allow you to overpay if you want to, up to 10% of the outstanding balance of the loan without incurring a fee. And on that data, we've started to see in the last few months a clear pickup again. Households who do have those savings, those higher income households, are using those savings not to support the economy or to spend more, but to pay down debt. And for those households that do have mortgages, they face a very big refinancing shock coming down the tracks the next year or two. And those savings, I think, won't filter back into the economy, but they'll be used to pay down debt where possible.
That's really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Sorry.
Emma. That's absolutely great.